Hey guys! Tonight, we slip back into the 7th century, into a palace so big it feels like its hallways stretch all the way into dreams. Lanterns glow through silk curtains. The scent of sandalwood clings to the air, and you're already squinting, wondering how anybody finds their way around without getting lost in endless corridors of red lacquer and gold leaf. You're about to meet a girl who, by all accounts, should have just been another nameless beauty in the crowd. A palace girl in silk, one of hundreds tucked into this massive Tang Dynasty harem. But here's the twist. She isn't going to stay anonymous. Nope, against every expectation, against all the rules, against all the very grumpy Confucian scholars clutching their scrolls. This girl is going to claw her way up until she's the only woman in all of Chinese history to sit on the imperial throne as emperor. Yeah, spoiler alert. But also, you probably won't survive this climb yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now, down in the comments. I always love seeing the little world map fill up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle into Luoyang, one of the Tang Dynasty's dazzling capitals. It's the year 624 when Wu Zhao is born, though the calendar's technicalities depend on which chronicler you believe. She grows up in a family that isn't exactly royal, but they're not shabby either. Her father, Wu Shihuo, makes his fortune in timber and trade, and that money greases the gears of politics. Think of him like the dad who owns a massive lumber empire, wealthy enough to rub elbows with the elite, but still outside the club of aristocratic old families who claim to have run China since forever. Now picture little Wu Zhao wandering through her father's compound. High walls, carved gates, courtyards with carp ponds, and merchants haggling in the front. She isn't just another quiet girl with her embroidery hoop. Sources hint she's taught to read and write Chinese characters, something most women in her time never got. Imagine her leaning over bamboo slips, brush in hand, muttering lines of poetry under her breath while her nursemaid sighs, probably wishing she'd just focus on needlework. But Wu Zhao isn't wired for sitting still. Mainstream fact here. The Tang Dynasty was unusually cosmopolitan and open for its era. Foreign traders brought spices, silks, horses, and even new religions along the Silk Road. Women in Tang society actually had more freedom compared to earlier dynasties. They rode horses, they played polo, they dressed in bold fashions. So Wu Zhao is born into a China buzzing with new possibilities. Quirky tidbit: Tang ladies had this makeup style called huadian, tiny floral stickers or painted patterns on their foreheads. Picture Wu Zhao as a teen sticking a sparkly flower sticker right between her brows, basically the 7th century equivalent of edgy eyeliner. If TikTok existed then, she'd be the one doing tutorials with a sly smirk. This look makes your enemies underestimate you. Trust me. Her childhood also comes with a little whisper of privilege. Her father, for example, was appointed to minor offices, which meant Wu Zhao probably heard more politics at the dinner table than most kids. Imagine sitting there, trying to enjoy your dumplings, while your dad rants about some official messing up timber taxes. Historians still argue whether she was truly groomed from the start for bigger things, or if ambition grew inside her later, when palace life forced her hand. By age 13 or 14, she's chosen, out of thousands of possible girls across the empire, to enter the Tang Palace as a concubine to Emperor Taizong. It's like winning a lottery, where the prize is equal parts silk gowns and living inside a pressure cooker of jealous rivals. Concubines are ranked in strict layers, with titles that sound poetic but basically mean, "Don't look at me, I'm still at the bottom." Wu Zhao starts low. She's just a Chiron, one of the lowest rungs in the vast pyramid of women orbiting the emperor. You step into her slippers, thin silk, embroidered with cranes, sliding over cold marble floors. The palace is huge, like a self-contained city, gardens with peonies taller than you, music floating from hidden courtyards, and always the soft slap of felt shoes on stone. Wu Zhao is surrounded by hundreds of other girls, each hoping Taizong will look their way for a night, a week, maybe long enough to bear a child that secures their rank. Here's where her presence starts to stir. While many girls fade into the drapery, Wu Zhao has sharp eyes. Sources describe her as striking, tall, confident, with a voice that carried, and she had wit. The emperor notices her not just because she looks good in silk, but because she's quick on her feet. Imagine the scene. Taizong asks a question during a poetry recital, and while the other girls flutter fans nervously, Wu Zhao answers with some polished line that makes even the emperor pause. But here's the reality check. No matter how clever she is, she's still essentially trapped. She's one of maybe 1,000 concubines. Taizong is older, powerful, surrounded by counselors and generals. Wu Zhao spends much of her early palace life waiting, watching, maybe even grinding her teeth at night while practicing smiles in polished bronze mirrors. Historians still argue whether Wu Zhao was genuinely favored by Taizong during his lifetime, or whether she was mostly overlooked until later. The records are biased, written by scholars who hated the idea of a female ruler, so they often try to erase her presence in Taizong's reign. But think of it this way. Even if she wasn't the star concubine, she was learning. Every dinner, every whispered argument between eunuchs in the corridor, every ceremony she watched from the sidelines was free training for the ultimate game of power. And so, you walk with her through shadowy palace halls at night, the air damp with the scent of ink and old stone, as she realizes, quietly, dangerously, that being overlooked might actually be the best disguise of all. The palace never really sleeps, even when the candles burn low and the emperor's private quarters go quiet. There are still footsteps echoing on polished floors, maids rustling silk robes through corridors, eunuchs carrying trays of midnight medicine, and always the whispers. The harem is less like a family and more like a 1,000-player chess game, where every concubine is a piece that wants to move forward, but most are stuck, blocked, and waiting for someone else to topple. you find yourself pressed into that world alongside Wu Zhao, barely a teenager when she enters Emperor Taizong's court. She's called Kairen, a low rank that sounds elegant, but really means she's more decoration than decision maker. Still, the palace is a place where even the lowest ornament can rise, given the right combination of charm, timing, and sheer audacity. And Wu Zhao has plenty of that last ingredient, though she knows better than to show it too soon. By day, the harem is a peacock garden. Women dressed in flowing robes, dyed in exotic shades, cinnabar red, lapis blue, saffron yellow, glide through courtyards like moving paintings. They smell of clove oil and rose water, their hair weighed down with jade pins shaped like phoenixes. At first glance, it's dazzling. At second glance, it's terrifying. Because behind every lowered eyelash is calculation. Behind every polite smile is a tally sheet of who's rising and who's falling. Wu Zhao quickly learns that survival here isn't just about beauty. It's about listening, cataloging, and letting others underestimate you. She spends her first years walking softly, eyes sharp. At banquets, she notices which consort's dish goes untouched because the emperor favored another's cooking. She notices which maidservant lingers a second too long at the door, eavesdropping. She notices the way older concubines stiffen when Taizong's chief consort, Empress Wang, enters a room. Mainstream fact: the Tang imperial harem wasn't simply a pretty prison. It was a political machine. A woman who bore the emperor's son could secure not just her own survival, but her entire clan's fortune. Alliances formed not just among women, but between concubines and powerful ministers who might back them. This was the hidden network beneath the glittering surface of court life. And yet, the atmosphere wasn't only daggers and poison. Quirky tidbit: harem women were obsessed with little games and pastimes. One surviving record talks about a craze for dog racing, tiny lapdogs trained to chase colored silk ribbons down palace corridors. Imagine Wu Zhao leaning against a pillar, watching the daughters of nobility shriek with laughter as little fluffy dogs skitter across marble floors, and thinking, this is how my rivals spend their time. Perfect, but she's also learning from Empress Wang herself, a woman who holds the top spot but can't secure the emperor's full affection. Empress Wang is politically cautious, generous on the surface, but too indecisive. She doesn't crush her rivals. She lets them nibble at her authority. And Wu Zhao, sitting in the shadows, files that lesson away. Mercy in this palace is weakness, dressed in silk. Every night, the whispers grow thicker. Servants gossip about which girl was summoned to the emperor's chambers. Other concubines spread rumors, sometimes so wild they're almost funny, like the time someone claimed a rival's hair ornament had been cursed by a jealous spirit. Wu Zhao listens, doesn't repeat. She stores the information like treasure, and sometimes she makes her own tiny moves. A carefully chosen poem recited in front of the emperor, a well-timed smile at a banquet. Historians still argue whether Wu Zhao was already favored by Taizong in these years, or if she mostly remained background scenery until later. But what seems certain is that she was noticed for her intelligence. Taizong, who was no fool, appreciated sharp minds. There's one story, half fact, half rumor, that Taizong once asked his concubines about a passage in a Confucian classic. Most fumbled. Wu Zhao, barely 16, recited an answer that was both correct and witty, making the emperor laugh. That might have been the first moment she stepped out of the blur of silk sleeves and became a distinct presence in his mind. Still, she knows her place. At night, lying on her thin mattress beneath embroidered canopies, she can hear the faint crying of other concubines. Girls discarded after a brief audience, or women who realize they may never rise above obscurity. Wu Zhao doesn't cry. She plans. Now let's step back a moment. The Tang Dynasty itself is buzzing like a festival outside these palace walls. Chang'an, the western capital, is so cosmopolitan that travelers say you can hear Persian, Indian, Turkic, and Chinese languages, all in the same marketplace. Buddhist monks chant sutras near Taoist priests brewing elixirs, while merchants hawk glassware from distant Rome. All that variety trickles into the palace too. Foreign fabrics, new instruments, exotic spices. Wu Zhao is growing up in a world that's less rigid than the centuries before, and she senses the cracks in old rules. Quirky detail again? Fashion. Tang women sometimes wore men's riding clothes, short jackets, high boots, and swaggered around on horses through city streets. It scandalized older Confucian types. Inside the palace, you could see both, women in heavy formal gowns and others sneaking into boyish outfits. Wu Zhao herself would later favor bold styles that scandalized her critics. For now, she files away the fact that appearances can be weaponized. But beneath the glamour, the harem is a dangerous theater. Eunuchs pass messages. Ministers outside the palace sponsor their favored concubines. Empress Wang tries to hold her position, but rival Lady Xiao lurks, scheming. Wu Zhao watches both camps. She's not powerful enough yet to join either side, but she doesn't need to. Observing is power too. Historians still argue whether Wu Zhao, at this stage, truly had ambitions for the throne, or whether she simply wanted survival in a gilded cage. Some suggest her drive for absolute power came later, forged by disappointment and exile. Others believe she carried ambition from the start, nurtured in her father's politically savvy household. Either way, the girl in silk is sharpening herself like a hidden blade. And in those long nights, when the palace grows silent and the moonlight pours through lattice windows, you imagine her sitting upright, brush in hand, scribbling lines of poetry that no one will read yet. She's rehearsing language, charm, arguments for a stage much larger than any concubine's chamber. Because in the palace of whispers, only those who learn to listen survive. And Wu Zhao? She's listening better than anyone else. The emperor's gaze is like sunlight. If it falls on you, you bloom. If it doesn't, you wither. Every concubine in the Tang harem lives in the hope of catching it, even for a fleeting second. Most never do. But Wu Zhao, still a teenager, still officially just a low-ranked K-Ren, manages to find herself in that rare spotlight. You follow her footsteps as she walks into one of the grand audience halls of Taizong's palace. The floors gleam with polished tiles, the pillars painted in vermilion and gold. Rows of officials bow, their robes rustling like waves. At the far end, beneath a canopy embroidered with dragons, sits Emperor Taizong. The warrior king who carved the Tang Dynasty out of chaos. He's older now, graying at the temples, but still formidable, with the kind of presence that makes even generals kneel a little deeper. So, how does a slip of a girl catch the attention of the most powerful man in China? It isn't beauty alone. The palace is crowded with beauty. There are girls whose faces glow like porcelain, women whose hair shines like black silk rope, consorts trained from childhood to sing with voices that could melt lacquer. Wu Zhao is pretty, yes, sources say, tall, commanding, with sharp eyes. But it's her wit, her timing, her refusal to simply be ornamental that draws Taizong's eye. Mainstream fact: Emperor Taizong valued intellect. He surrounded himself with some of the greatest scholars and advisors of his age. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a statesman who liked debating classics, history, and strategy. That meant concubines who could actually talk to him, rather than just look pretty, had an edge. There's a famous anecdote, half history, half court gossip, that one day Taizong challenged his women with a riddle from a Confucian classic. Most stammered. Wu Zhao, barely 16, offered a clever, polished answer. Not only did she quote the line, she twisted it into something witty. Imagine the emperor's chuckle echoing through the hall, while the other girls stiffen behind their fans. In that moment, Wu Zhao isn't just another flower in the garden. She's the one flower that made the emperor laugh. Of course, attention is dangerous. The harem is a nest of jealousies. Other women start watching Wu Zhao more closely, whispering her name like a curse. Empress Wang notices too. She's the lawful wife, holder of the Phoenix Seal, but she can't monopolize Taizong's heart. Every time another girl earns his smile, Wang's position feels shakier. Wu Zhao knows this, and she plays carefully. She doesn't push too hard. She isn't suddenly flaunting her favor. She's still the girl who listens more than she speaks, observes more than she acts. But she makes sure the emperor sees her when it matters. A graceful bow during morning court. A line of poetry offered at the right moment. A song sung when his mood is heavy. Quirky tidbit: Taizong kept a collection of exotic animals, camels, peacocks, even lions gifted from foreign rulers. Once, it said, Wu Zhao volunteered to feed the emperor's favorite horse, a fiery stallion that most servants feared. She approached calmly, whispered to it, and the beast settled under her touch. Whether or not that really happened, the tale became a symbol. The girl who could soothe wild creatures might also soothe an emperor's restless mind. Now, imagine the nights when Taizong actually summons her. The ritual is stiff. Concubines are bathed, perfumed, dressed, and carried to the emperor's chambers. Everything is recorded, from who entered to what hour they left. But for Wu Zhao, those nights are more than ritual. They are opportunities. She listens to Taizong's stories of war campaigns, asks careful questions about governance, offers reflections that sound respectful, but also insightful. Historians still argue whether Taizong truly loved her or simply enjoyed her wit as a pleasant diversion. Some suggest she was only a minor player in his enormous harem, remembered only later because of what she would become. Others believe she already stood out as a favorite, someone Taizong trusted enough to share thoughts he wouldn't with anyone else. The truth is murky, And maybe that's fitting. But here's what we do know. Wu Zhao was learning. Even if she wasn't the top consort, she was watching the emperor at close range. She saw how he dealt with ministers, how he weighed punishments, how he rewarded loyalty. She saw the cracks in his court, the rivalries between powerful families, the overconfidence of noble clans, the eagerness of officials to curry favor. And then, life drops its first harsh reminder. Taizong isn't eternal. He begins to age more visibly. His health falters. The once vigorous warrior who led cavalry charges is now leaning on medicine and prayers. Wu Zhao watches this decline with mixed emotions. On one hand, the emperor's failing strength could spell the end of her time in the palace. Concubines of a dead ruler are typically sent to convents, shaved-headed, their silk exchanged for plain robes. On the other hand, she senses change on the horizon. And Wu Zhao has always been someone who can make change into opportunity. At this stage, though, she is still simply a concubine in silk, standing out a little more than the rest, but far from the throne. Her name is a whisper in the emperor's ear, a presence noticed but not yet decisive. And yet, as you lean with her on a balcony, overlooking the moonlit courtyards, you can feel it. The emperor's eye is on her more often than not. And for a girl in the Tang Palace, that single beam of attention is the crack in the door through which destiny might, just might, begin to slip. When an emperor dies, the palace breathes out a long, chilling sigh. For the women who once glittered under his gaze, it isn't just grief. It's a sentence. You're standing with Wu Zhao, now in her early 20s, when Emperor Taizong finally passes in 649. The drums and bells toll through the city. The streets fill with mourning banners. Inside the palace, the rules click into place with the cold precision of a lock. Concubines who belong to the late emperor cannot simply return to normal life. To prevent scandal, to preserve purity, they're sent away to Buddhist convents, hair shaved, silk gowns, traded for coarse robes. They vanish behind temple walls, like shadows dissolving in daylight. And so it happens to Wu Zhao. She is bundled off to a convent, her long black hair cut away, her future clipped with it. Imagine the humiliation, once draped in perfumed silks, now bent over prayer scrolls, chanting sutras in cold halls where incense lingers thicker than food. Her hands, which once smoothed fine brocade, now blister from cleaning temple floors. Mainstream fact. This was standard practice. Imperial concubines of a deceased emperor were often forced into religious life, partly to prevent them from becoming pawns in political marriages. For most women, this was the end of the story. They spent the rest of their lives in quiet seclusion. But Wu Zhao isn't most women. In the convent, she doesn't break. She watches, she learns Buddhist rituals, copies scripture, sharpens patience. But her ambition doesn't go bald with her head. If anything, it simmers hotter. Imagine her sitting in meditation, lips moving in chants, while inside her mind, she's mapping out how she might step back into the palace. Here's the quirky tidbit. Tang Buddhism was wildly popular, and some convents were surprisingly well connected to high society. Noble families sponsored temples. Powerful ministers sent wives and daughters there temporarily for spiritual retreats. These weren't just holy places. They were gossip hubs. Wu Zhao, sweeping temple courtyards, probably overheard more political chatter than some officials did. And then fate cracks the door open again. The new emperor, Gaozong, is Taizong's son. Young, impressionable, less commanding than his father. And this is where things get spicy. He already knows Wu Zhao. She had caught his attention back when she was serving his father. There were whispers, rumors that he had admired her even then. Historians still argue whether Wu Zhao and Gaozong had feelings for each other during Taizong's reign. Was it innocent admiration? A forbidden romance? Or later gossip magnifying shadows into scandal? Nobody can prove it. But the fact remains, Gaozong remembers her. Picture this. Empress Wang, Gaozong's wife, has a problem. She hasn't borne him a son, and her rival, consort Xiao, threatens her position. Desperate to regain influence, she makes a strange move. She actually arranges for Wu Zhao, the former concubine, to return from the convent and join Gaozong's harem. It sounds absurd, inviting a competitor into your marriage bed, but palace politics makes people do desperate things. Empress Wang hopes that Wu Zhao will side with her against consort Xiao. Wu Zhao re-enters the palace not as a nun, but as a consort, trading plain robes for silks once again. Imagine her first step back onto those gleaming marble floors, the rustle of her new gown echoing like triumph. The other women in the harem glance up with narrowed eyes. Hadn't she been buried in a convent? And now here she is, back. Her head held higher than before, mainstream fact. Again, Gaozong elevates her quickly. Within a short time, Wu Zhao gives birth to sons, something Empress Wang never accomplished. Childbearing was currency in the palace, and Wu Zhao suddenly has plenty to spend. Now comes the quirky detail. Tang medical texts mention odd fertility practices, amulets, charms, even concoctions of deer antler or powdered pearls. Whether Wu Zhao tried any of these or not, later gossip accused her of sorcery, of using unearthly tricks to secure children and favor. Were these real practices or just slander? Hard to say, but it shows how quickly success in the harem drew suspicion. Wu Zhao, meanwhile, is no fool. She plays the role of dutiful consort, attending to Gaozong, flattering him, listening to his worries. But beneath that, she's positioning herself. She knows Empress Wang brought her back as a pawn. She also knows pawns, in the right hands, can become queens. Historians still argue whether Wu Zhao's return was engineered entirely by Wang, or whether Wu Zhao herself orchestrated the move through behind-the-scenes influence. Was she opportunistic or masterful? Either way, she's back inside the dragon's den. And this time, she's not just surviving, she's preparing. You sit with her one evening in her new quarters. The room smells faintly of plum blossoms from the courtyard outside. Gaozong has just left after a long conversation. He seemed relaxed, even happy. Wu Zhao stands at the window, hair pinned high with golden combs, her silk gown glowing in candlelight. And you can feel it. She isn't the same girl who once waited nervously for the emperor's eye. She's tasted exile, shaved her head, lived among shadows. She's endured loss and humiliation. Now she's back, armed with sharper instincts, and most importantly, heirs to secure her place. The palace whispers are already starting again, names sliding off lips like poison. But this time, she isn't just listening. This time, she's ready to answer. The Tang Palace hums differently once Wu Zhao steps back into it. The clamor of music, the rustle of silks, the endless procession of ministers with scrolls. It all seems just as before. But for her, it's changed. She isn't a nervous girl trailing behind curtains anymore. She's a consort with the emperor's eye, and more importantly, his heart. Gaozong, young and softer than his father, is already leaning toward her as though she's a lantern in the dark. You walk with her through the corridors, past tall pillars carved with dragons, hearing whispers coil like smoke behind her. The nun returned, they say, the late emperor's concubine. But Gaozong doesn't care. He sees in Wu Zhao a companion, someone who not only understands palace games, but also soothes him. Mainstream fact, Gaozong was not a strong ruler compared to his father. Where Taizong was decisive and commanding, Gaozong was cautious, easily swayed by stronger personalities. Historians often describe him as pliable, gentle, sometimes indecisive. For Wu Zhao, this is opportunity. She becomes not just his favorite consort, but his confidant. At night, when the lanterns are dim and the chatter of court fades, Wu Zhao leans close, offering counsel. Gaozong frets over ministers and ceremonies. Wu Zhao suggests solutions with careful phrasing, respectful but firm. Over time, her advice becomes part of his decisions. Slowly, love and politics entangle, until you can hardly tell where affection ends and strategy begins. Quirky tidbit. The Tang court adored exotic perfumes. One popular scent was made from eaglewood resin, burned so richly that the smoke clung to robes for days. Gaozong was said to be fond of such luxuries, and Wu Zhao made sure she always appeared before him, scented with his favorite fragrance. Imagine her sweeping into his chambers, her gown trailing smoke of sweet wood, her presence already filling the air before she even speaks. In a world where appearance mattered as much as policy, even perfume was a weapon. But it isn't just sensual charm. Wu Zhao knows the true battlefield is the harem. Empress Wang still wears the phoenix crown, but she's childless, and that is a wound no ornament can heal. Consort Xiao, fertile and favored, is Wang's main rival. Wu Zhao steps between them like a blade, because unlike them, she now gives Gaozong what they cannot: sons. Each birth is a victory, not just for her body, but for her clan, elevating her position higher and higher. Historians still argue whether Gaozong truly loved her passionately, or whether his reliance on her was more about convenience, finding in Wu Zhao someone who could handle what he couldn't. Was she the power behind the throne from the start, or did she grow into it only later, once Gaozong's health declined? Either way, their bond becomes the hinge upon which the empire's doors begin to turn. Imagine one evening, Gaozong reclines, complaining of headaches. He was prone to them. Perhaps migraines, perhaps hypertension. The records don't say. Ministers wait outside with petitions, but he waves them off. Wu Zhao enters, her voice calm, offering to read aloud poetry instead of medicine. Her words roll like soft water, and soon Gaozong relaxes, nodding, letting her hold the burden of decision. That is how it starts. She carries the small burdens, then the medium ones, until finally, the great ones rest in her lap. Outside their chambers, the storm brews stronger. Empress Wang senses her authority slipping. Consort Xiao schemes. The harem bristles with jealousy so sharp, you could prick your finger on them. Wu Zhao smiles politely, bows respectfully, but her mind is racing. She has already tasted the precarious balance of being exiled once. She knows survival here doesn't mean compromise. It means conquest. And Gaozong? He's falling ever deeper into her orbit. Ministers whisper uneasily about her influence. Courtiers mutter that the emperor consults her too often. But what can they do? She is not just a passing fancy. She is bearing his airs, filling his chambers with laughter and the cries of babies, while rivals stare into empty cradles. Quirky image. Tang emperors loved grand hunts, riding out with banners fluttering and hounds barking. Gaozong wasn't as vigorous as his father, but on the rare occasions he tried, Wu Zhao sometimes accompanied him. Imagine her on horseback, robes modified for riding, hair pinned high but steady in the wind, offering encouragement while Gaozong falters on his stirrups. In those moments, courtiers see clearly. She's the strong one, even in leisure. It's no longer a question of if Wu Zhao will rise further, but how soon. And as you stand with her in candlelight, hearing Gaozong sigh contentedly at her side, you know, this isn't just love. This is the sharpening edge of power. The palace is no longer just marble halls and carved beams. It has become a chessboard. Every smile conceals a strategy. Every bow might hide a dagger. And every whispered word travels faster than a carrier pigeon. You follow Wu Zhao through this tightening web, where silks rustle like drawn blades, and painted smiles are more dangerous than swords. Empress Wang still sits as the Huang Ho, the Empress proper, adorned with the phoenix crown, jewels heavy on her temples, but ornaments don't protect her from whispers. She is barren. She is cold. She cannot give the emperor sons. In a dynasty where lineage is lifeblood, this is a wound no doctor can heal. Consort Xiao, graceful and fertile, sees the weakness and presses it. Her children play in the palace gardens, their laughter a cruel reminder to Wang. Ministers with ties to Xiao begin murmuring that perhaps she is the true mother of the realm. And here steps Wu Zhao, no longer a minor consort, not yet supreme, but clever enough to wedge herself in between. With each child she bears, her foothold strengthens. Gaozong dotes on her sons, cradles them with relief that his line is secure. His affection for their mother only deepens. Mainstream fact. Tang records reveal a bitter rivalry between Empress Wang and Wu Zhao, one that escalated into open warfare of influence. Wang even allied herself with consort Xiao in desperation, hoping together they could unseat Wu Zhao from Gaozong's heart. The irony? By allying with her own rival, Wang weakened her own prestige further. It was as if two queens were sharing a chessboard against a single, sharper player. Quirky tidbit. The palace gossips were not idle. They had an entire system of nicknames for consorts, ministers, and eunuchs. Empress Wang was sometimes mocked behind her back as the empty phoenix, glorious crown, empty womb. Wu Zhao? She was whispered about as the rising star, a phrase that carried both admiration and venom. Imagine the kitchens, servants kneeling as they pluck herbs, whispering those names under their breath, afraid the walls might overhear. Historians debate, was Gaozong merely passive, letting women tear at each other while he drifted in the middle? Or did he deliberately favor Wu Zhao, subtly encouraging her rise? Some scholars paint him as weak, bending to her will. Others suggest he recognized her sharpness and leaned on her because he knew she could manage what he could not. In either case, the effect was the same. Wu Zhao's shadow lengthened across the court. Picture the scene one spring evening. Gaozong holds a banquet in the hall of brilliant morning. Lanterns sway from the ceiling like captured suns. Musicians pluck pipa strings, and courtiers sip wine, laughing too loudly at the emperor's jokes. Empress Wang sits rigid, her smile tight, her gaze darting to Wu Zhao across the room. Wu Zhao, calm as a lotus, floating on still water, lifts her cup and lets the candlelight catch her eyes. Gaozong sees only her, and that is the true danger. For in the palace, being unseen is safer than being too visible. Empress Wang knows it. Consort Xiao knows it. Yet Wu Zhao thrives under the glare, her confidence only deepening. Quirky image. The Tang harem had parrots, bright green birds that could mimic voices. Eunuchs sometimes trained them to say flattering phrases like, "Long live the Empress," or "Blessed be the consort." One story tells of a parrot that accidentally repeated gossip about a consort's affair, nearly causing scandal. Imagine walking through the corridors, and one such parrot squawks, "Rising star, rising star." The courtiers glance nervously. Wu Zhao only smiles. The intrigues are no longer whispers, they are maneuvers. Empress Wang begins pressing ministers to plead for her. Consort Xiao tries to entrench her children's position. Wu Zhao moves more subtly. She cultivates eunuchs, ladies-in-waiting, and even scholars, building a network not of glitter, but of loyalty. And through it all, Gaozong leans closer to her, weary of the squabbles. Soothed by her calm, the storm is gathering, and you sense the air crackling in the palace corridors. Something must give, and soon it will. The Tang Palace has always been a stage. Painted beams arch like curtains, silk screens shimmer like veils, and every gesture is part of a performance. But now the play darkens. The Empress herself, Wang, the empty phoenix, is losing her lines, and Wu Zhao, once the rising star, is quietly writing the script. Lady Wang had tried everything. She had allied with Consort Xiao, her rival, hoping their combined beauty and family's influence might block Wu Zhao's rise. She had wept before Gaozong, reminding him of the years she had shared his throne. She had summoned ministers to argue that a barren empress was still heaven's appointed mother of the realm. But the emperor's gaze no longer lingered on her. It drifted, always, to Wu Zhao. Gaozong's affections were not just personal, they were political. Wu Zhao had given him sons, heirs that Wang could not. In a dynasty that lived and died by lineage, this was no small detail. It was the difference between legitimacy and failure. Mainstream fact. In 654, an event occurred that would seal Lady Wang's doom. A baby girl, Wu Zhao's daughter, died suddenly. Some records say of illness. Others whisper it was something darker. Empress Wang, already jealous, was accused of murdering the child. Wu Zhao wasted no time. She wept before Gaozong, accusing Wang of monstrous cruelty. Gaozong, torn between grief and rage, believed her. Quirky tidbit. One Tang Chronicle claims that after the baby's death, Wu Zhao staged a dramatic scene. She allegedly cradled the infant's body, smeared her tears across her cheeks, and refused food for days, performing her grief so convincingly that the entire court began murmuring that Wang must indeed have done it. Imagine the courtiers whispering behind their sleeves. Did you hear? The Empress killed the child. Whether true or not, mattered less than the echo it left in every ear. Debate among historians. Did Wu Zhao herself orchestrate the child's death to frame Wang? Some argue it was a cold-blooded move, one that revealed her ruthless brilliance. Others suggest the child simply died of natural causes, and Wu Zhao sees the tragedy as an opportunity. In either case, history remembers the outcome, not the innocents. Lady Wang, cornered and frantic, tried to defend herself. She swore she was innocent. She begged Gaozong to see reason. But the emperor, swayed by grief and Wu Zhao's calm sorrow, turned cold. Wang's allies shrank back, unwilling to risk their careers or their necks by defending a fading star. Even consort Xiao, once her ally, began to distance herself. And then came the coup de grace. Wu Zhao accused both Wang and Xiao of witchcraft, a capital crime. Talismans and charms were discovered in their quarters. Whether planted or real, they sealed the verdict. Picture the day of their fall. It is late autumn, the palace air crisp, leaves rattling like dry bones against the vermilion gates. Lady Wang is summoned to the Hall of Golden Light. She kneels before Gaozong, but he will not meet her eyes. Behind him, Wu Zhao stands serene, the image of sorrow and virtue. A decree is read. Wang is stripped of her title. Consort Xiao is also dismissed. Both are dragged away screaming, their jeweled crowns clattering on the marble floor. Quirky image. One servant later whispered that as Lady Wang was escorted out, her phoenix crown rolled across the floor and bumped into Wu Zhao's embroidered shoe. She didn't flinch, didn't even look down, just let it rest there, as if the crown itself had chosen its next mistress. The punishment was brutal. Wang and Xiao were confined, humiliated, and, according to some accounts, later executed on Wu Zhao's orders, their bodies beaten and discarded. The empty phoenix was empty no more. She was gone. Wu Zhao, now elevated, was granted the phoenix crown. The silk train of the Empress swept across the hall, trailing over Wang's memory. Ministers bowed. Eunuchs prostrated themselves. Gaozong smiled with relief, as though a storm had passed. But the storm had only just begun, for with the fall of Lady Wang, Wu Zhao was no longer just a consort. She was Empress Wu, queen of the realm, mother of the dynasty, and from this throne, she would not merely hold power. She would wield it. The phoenix crown now sits firmly on Wu Zhao's head. The courtiers bow deeper. The silken train of her robes drags longer, and her words carry the weight of law. But becoming Empress is only the beginning. To survive in the Tang court, you don't just wear the crown, you learn to bend its gilded weight to your will. By the mid-650s, Wu Zhao has claimed the title of Huang Ho, Empress of China, yet she is still, technically, behind the throne. Gaozong, the son of heaven, remains the ruler, or so it seems. In practice, the emperor is plagued by ill health, headaches, dizziness, sometimes so weak he can hardly rise from bed. Every time he falters, Wu Zhao is there, calm, efficient, ready with a plan. It's here that her skill blossoms. She doesn't rush to the front of the stage. Instead, she orchestrates from behind the curtain. Mainstream fact: Empress Wu began sitting in on audiences with ministers, supposedly to assist Gaozong during his ailments. It started small, taking notes, clarifying orders, reminding him of names. But soon, she was speaking directly, issuing judgments, even drafting edicts. Gaozong allowed it, perhaps even welcomed it. He once sighed to a confidant, "She alone understands what I wish." Quirky tidbit. One courtier, shocked by Wu's growing presence, later complained that she sat behind a screen during audiences, literally listening in on state business through gauzy silk curtains, then whispering advice. It became a running joke. China is ruled by a woman behind the screen. The eunuchs, no doubt, gossiped endlessly. Did you see her hand, poking out to pass him the scroll? Historians debate. Was Wu merely propping up a weak emperor, or was she already shaping an empire in her image? Some scholars argue Gaozong leaned on her like a crutch, allowing her influence out of genuine need. Others believe Wu Zhao carefully cultivated his dependence, using illness as a political wedge. Either way, her power was growing in plain sight. She didn't just rely on charm or clever whispers. She began restructuring the court. Loyal ministers were promoted, dissenting ones demoted or exiled. Her trusted allies, often outsiders or men overlooked by aristocratic clans, were placed in key positions. These were not the old noble families, the entrenched Tang elites. They were men who owed everything to Wu Zhao. Behind the throne, she was weaving a new network of power. One chilling story circulates among historians. Wu set up a secret police force, run by eunuchs and officials devoted to her. Their task? To root out dissent, to report whispers of disloyalty, to keep watch even on high ministers. Imagine walking through the jade-tiled corridors of the palace, speaking a little too freely over tea. And the next morning, a eunuch delivers a summons. Behind the throne, Wu's ears were everywhere. Quirky image. A Tang poem describes palace courtiers walking with their mouths closed, as if their lips were stitched with silk. A nervous nod to the fear that every word might reach the Empress's shadow network. But Wu was more than ruthless. She was visionary. She encouraged scholars to compile histories, oversaw Buddhist temple projects, and even dabbled in policy reforms, tax relief in some regions, and agricultural improvements. To the common people, she began to appear not just as Gaozong's consort, but as a figure of stability, a motherly presence, ensuring order. Picture this duality. On one side of the palace, ministers tremble before her secret police. On the other, commoners in distant provinces kneel in prayer, blessing the Empress who brings them grain relief and temple blessings. And Gaozong? He retreats more and more into her shadow. Some days, his headaches are so fierce that he lets Wu conduct entire audiences. Other days, he strolls with her in the imperial gardens, content to let her manage the empire, while he watches the koi ripple the ponds behind the throne. Wu Zhao is no longer merely whispering. She is speaking for the emperor, and soon she will speak as the emperor. But for now, she is content to remain the hand behind the curtain, the quiet power no one dares challenge. Yet in every shadowed hall, in every careful bow, one question hums. How long will she remain behind? And when will she step fully into the light? The throne of the Tang Dynasty still bears Gaozong's name, but the empire is no longer ruled by his hands. By the early 660s, the palace whispers a new title for Wu Zhao, Huang Taihu, the Empress Regent. Though not yet official, the shift is undeniable. Every decree, every decision, every flick of imperial authority is traced back to her. Gaozong's health worsens. His dizzy spells and weakness make it impossible for him to govern day to day. At first, Wu Zhao simply attends councils with him. She sits behind a silk screen, her voice filtering through like a low chant, steady and assured. Ministers bow to Gaozong, but their eyes dart toward the screen, knowing the true power sits cloaked in gauze. Over time, even this pretense grows thin. Wu Zhao begins appearing openly, sitting beside Gaozong on the dragon throne, her phoenix crown gleaming, her gaze fixed and unflinching. It is a shocking sight. No woman of the Tang court has ever sat with the emperor in state audiences, but Gaozong allows it, and the ministers, however reluctantly, adjust. Mainstream fact. By 660, Empress Wu was effectively regent. When Gaozong's health failed, she conducted state business, issued edicts, and presided over audiences. Some records even say she signed decrees in her own name. Though the dynasty was still Tang, the rhythm of government was now Wu Zhao's. Quirky tidbit. She didn't just wield power in stuffy court halls. Wu loved public ceremony. In one account, she ordered enormous Buddhist statues paraded through the streets of Chang'an, golden and towering, with incense burning thick enough to choke the alleys. Commoners cheered her as a living bodhisattva. Imagine her riding in a vermilion palanquin behind the statue, her robes shimmering in the sun, while Gaozong stayed hidden in the palace, too frail to walk. Historians debate, was this arrangement one of mutual trust or manipulation? Some argue Gaozong genuinely relied on Wu Zhao, believing her wisdom surpassed the bickering of his ministers. Others suggest she tightened her grip carefully, exploiting his weakness and surrounding him with her loyalists until he had no choice. Either way, by now the ministers addressed their memorials to Gaozong, but wrote them for Wu's eyes. Her regency also marked a turning point in how she used ideology. Wu leaned heavily into Buddhism, commissioning grand sutras and proclaiming herself the protector of the Dharma. Temples flourished. Monks praised her as a reincarnation of Maitreya, the future Buddha. This was not just piety, it was propaganda. By presenting herself as a cosmic, almost divine figure, Wu Zhao built legitimacy in a world where Confucian tradition scowled at female rulers. If Confucian scholars muttered, "A woman must obey her husband," she countered with the voice of heaven. A bodhisattva rules all beings, male and female alike. Meanwhile, she tightened her political machine. Loyal officials like Xu Jingzong and the secret police expanded their reach. Enemies of the Empress found themselves demoted, exiled, or worse, invited to drink a suspicious cup of medicine, quirky court rumor. One unlucky minister who had dared criticize Wu supposedly tripped on palace stairs and accidentally fell to his death. The eunuchs whispered that the steps themselves bowed to her will. As Empress Regent, Wu Zhao also began reshaping the dynasty's future. She encouraged her sons, but only on her terms. When her eldest showed signs of independence, she removed him from succession. The court grew uneasy. Was the empire being prepared for a puppet emperor under her control, or for Wu herself to step onto the throne? The line between empress and emperor was blurring. One day in court, Gaozong, pale and trembling, leaned heavily on attendants. He could barely read the memorials in his hands. Before ministers could stammer their concerns, Wu Zhao reached out, took the scroll, and read it aloud with clarity. She gave orders, assigned tasks, and dismissed the audience with a crisp nod. Gaozong said nothing. His silence was the final confirmation. China was ruled by the Empress Regent. In the streets of Chang'an, children sang rhymes. The Son of Heaven sleeps. The Mother of Heaven speaks. Behind the palace walls, courtiers bowed more deeply to Wu than to Gaozong. And across the empire, farmers and monks alike began whispering her name, not as consort, but as sovereign. The regency had begun. The question was no longer if Wu Zhao would take the throne herself. It was only when. The empire is vast, and like a great silk tapestry, it cannot be stretched without threads snapping. By the early years of Wu Zhao's regency, the Tang court trembles with murmurs of discontent. To the Confucian ministers, a woman seated at the helm of empire is not only scandalous, it is unnatural. To ambitious generals on the frontier, it is opportunity. And to Wu Zhao herself, it is inevitable resistance. Something to be stamped out quickly and decisively. The first sparks come from within the palace. Members of the Li clan, the imperial bloodline, are increasingly uneasy. Wu Zhao has already shuffled princes around like chess pieces, deposing her eldest son, shifting another forward, then pulling him back again when he showed too much independence. The Li clan knows exactly what she is doing, keeping her sons weak so that she remains strong. But outside Chang'an, discontent becomes more dangerous. Local rebellions break out in the provinces, fanned by aristocrats and scholars who claim loyalty to the Tang house and denounce the Empress as a usurper. Mainstream fact: one of the earliest and most significant uprisings against Wu Zhao was led by members of the Tang royal family itself. Li Wanjie, Prince of Han, and his brother, Li Zhen, Prince of Yue. They launched rebellions in 684 CE, shortly after Gaozong's death, attempting to restore male Tang power. Both failed spectacularly. Wu's forces crushed them, and their families were exterminated. Picture the scene. Provincial soldiers march under the banners of the Tang house, shouting, "Restore the rightful sons of the dragon." The dust of their march rises across fertile plains, but Wu Zhao's loyal generals, hardened by years of frontier campaigns, descend like a hawk on startled prey. When word of the rebellion reaches Chang'an, Wu Zhao does not flinch. Instead, she calls her ministers together, and with her phoenix crown gleaming in the torchlight, declares, "Heaven entrusted the empire to me. Those who resist heaven's decree bring ruin only to themselves." And indeed, ruin comes. Quirky tidbit. Wu Zhao was not above psychological warfare. During the crackdown on these rebellions, she ordered the execution of not only the princes, but also their families. One account even claims she displayed their severed heads at the capital gates, framed with silk ribbons, as a grim warning. Passers-by whispered nervously that the Empress was not only ruthless, but theatrical, turning rebellion into a cautionary play for all to see. Historians debate. Were these rebellions genuine attempts to restore the Tang Dynasty's male heirs, or desperate, disorganized flares of aristocratic panic? Some argue that Wu Zhao exaggerated the danger to justify purges of the Li clan, consolidating her own authority. Others contend that the revolts were real threats. Had even one gained traction, Wu's power might have unraveled before her empire had truly formed. Beyond the executions, Wu Zhao reshaped the system that allowed such resistance to brew. She strengthened the imperial examination system, elevating officials by merit rather than aristocratic blood. For those ambitious enough to rise through study and loyalty, Wu became a patron rather than an enemy. In doing so, she undercut the old Tang nobility, the very families most likely to back rebellions. Quirky side note: scholars gossiped that Wu Zhao personally read through exam essays, circling mistakes in red ink. Imagine being a young man trembling before the throne, only to have the Empress herself correct your calligraphy like a stern schoolteacher. But rebellion was not limited to aristocrats. Out in the provinces, tax burdens and corvée labor obligations fed unrest among commoners. Some joined bandit bands, others rallied behind local warlords who claimed to fight in the name of justice. Wu Zhao's response was as swift as it was merciless. She unleashed her generals with orders to suppress resistance with overwhelming force. Villages that harbored rebels found themselves burned, fields salted, survivors resettled far from their homes. To cement loyalty, Wu Zhao promoted the victorious generals to high court positions, but always rotated them quickly, never allowing one commander to grow too popular. She had learned from history's lessons. A general loved by his troops could become tomorrow's usurper. In Chang'an, the atmosphere grew tense, but oddly celebratory. After each crushed rebellion, the city erupted in massive parades. Wu Zhao rode through in her jeweled palanquin, incense curling around her, banners declaring "Mandate of Heaven Preserved." Children chanted rhymes, adults bowed low, and the ministers pretended not to choke on the bitter taste of defeat. Wu Zhao had turned the rebellions into proof of her divine legitimacy. Every failed revolt became evidence that heaven itself had chosen her to rule. One chilling story survives from this time. A captured rebel prince was brought before her. Instead of immediate execution, Wu Zhao offered him wine and asked, "Did you believe heaven favored you?" The prince, pale but defiant, answered, "Yes." Wu Zhao smiled faintly, then gestured. Guards dragged him away for beheading. To her ministers, she remarked calmly, "Heaven is not mistaken. Only men are." By the end of this bloody cycle, Wu Zhao had achieved two things. She crushed resistance both militarily and symbolically, and she made it clear that her authority was not borrowed from her husband, nor merely the shadow of the Tang. It was her own. The rebellions had tested her, and she emerged stronger. Strong enough, perhaps, to reach for what no woman in Chinese history had ever claimed: the throne itself, not as regent, not as mother, but as emperor. For years, Wu Zhao had ruled defensively, fending off rebellions and silencing critics. But once the smoke of domestic unrest cleared, her gaze turned outward. A ruler does not cement power by clinging to the throne alone. She must prove that heaven's mandate extends to the frontiers. And Wu Zhao, soon to style herself as emperor of a brand new Zhou dynasty, was nothing if not ambitious. The Tang Empire, now her empire, stretched like a dragon across the map. Fertile valleys in the heartland, glittering cities strung along the Silk Road, and restless tribes pushing against the borders. Expansion was both opportunity and necessity. To her ministers, Wu Zhao declared, "If heaven grants us dominion beneath the sky, we must show its breadth." And so, the armies marched. Mainstream fact. During Wu Zhao's reign, China expanded its influence into Central Asia and the Korean Peninsula. Her generals reasserted Tang power in the Tarim Basin and launched campaigns against the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo, securing vassal relationships that reinforced the empire's prestige. Imagine the scene: a long caravan of soldiers, horses, and supply wagons creaks through the mountain passes of Central Asia. Dust swirls, banners whip in the wind, and the distant echo of war drums rolls across the desert. Wu Zhao herself does not ride at the front, but her presence is carried in lacquered portraits, banners embroidered with the phoenix, and imperial decrees read aloud to troops before battle. The frontier tribes, accustomed to negotiating with Tang emperors, now face the reality of a Tang Empress. Some laugh at the absurdity, until Wu Zhao's generals cut down their strongholds, leaving smoldering ashes as her reply. Quirky tidbit: Wu Zhao understood propaganda as well as she did politics. After victories, she ordered the construction of giant stelae carved with inscriptions proclaiming her glory. One particularly bold edict had her declare herself not just emperor, but sage mother, divine ruler of all under heaven. For the common folk, these titles were awe-inspiring. For her critics, they were scandalous. But stone monuments, unlike ministers, do not argue back. Historians debate how much of this expansion was true conquest and how much was diplomatic theater. Some argue that Wu Zhao's military victories were exaggerated, her influence in Central Asia little more than nominal tribute from fractious tribes. Others insist her reign marked a genuine strengthening of China's western and northern frontiers, with garrisons and protectorates that endured long after her. The Korean campaigns stand out as particularly dramatic. The Tang court had long viewed Goguryeo as a thorn in its side, a proud, defiant kingdom that resisted submission. Wu Zhao continued her predecessor's campaigns, pressing the advantage whenever Goguryeo faltered. Envoys returned to Chang'an, bearing tribute of ginseng, furs, and rare horses, which Wu Zhao displayed in parades to show the capital that even distant lands bent before her will. Meanwhile, along the Silk Road, Wu Zhao's generals reasserted control over oasis states like Kucha and Khotan. These weren't just military triumphs, they were lifelines for trade. Silk, jade, and spices flowed westward, while jewels, fine horses, and exotic ideas flowed eastward into Chang'an. Wu Zhao's court grew richer, and her legitimacy grew stronger. In Chang'an, the markets buzzed with foreign merchants, Persians in embroidered robes, Sogdian traders with tall hats, Indian monks carrying scrolls. The air was thick with the scent of incense, fried dumplings, and sandalwood. For citizens of the capital, Wu Zhao's foreign conquests weren't distant abstractions. They were spices on the tongue and treasures in the bazaar. Another quirky note: Wu Zhao liked to compare herself with legendary rulers of the past. When a military expedition returned victorious, she staged ceremonies invoking Emperor Taizong and Han Wudi, implying that her reign was their equal or superior. In one ritual, she even had statues of conquered kings brought to bow before her throne, like clay puppets performing the submission their real counterparts had been forced into. But expansion was not just a matter of armies and stelae. Wu Zhao also expanded ideologically. She elevated Buddhism as the spiritual justification of her rule, sponsoring temples and spreading sutras that framed her as the reincarnation of Maitreya, the Buddha of the future. In doing so, she extended her influence not only across China's borders, but also into the minds of her subjects. For some, to resist her was not only treason, but a rejection of cosmic order itself. Yet, expansion carried risks. Each new campaign meant new taxes, new soldiers pulled from farms, new grumbling in the provinces. Wu Zhao's genius was in balancing victory with spectacle, so that each success looked greater than it perhaps was, and each failure was buried in silence. One chilling proverb, whispered in Chang'an, summed it up neatly. The empire grows fat on conquest, but the people grow thin. Still, the balance held. By the height of her reign, Wu Zhao could boast not only that she had quelled rebellion, but that she had expanded the realm of the dragon to its proudest reach in decades. The phoenix had spread its wings over the four corners of the world, but wings cast shadows, and shadows breed fear. Even as Wu Zhao's empire flourished, her enemies at court sharpened their knives in silence. Expansion abroad could not erase the fact that within her palace walls, danger still stirred. By now, Wu Zhao had proven that she could fight off palace intrigue, crush rebellion, and even extend China's borders with her armies and her propaganda. But empires are not only won with swords or silken banners. To endure, an empire must be built on ink, scrolls, and the tireless scribbling of bureaucrats. And here, Wu Zhao would leave one of her boldest legacies, a re-engineered bureaucracy that rewrote the rules of power in imperial China. For centuries, the Tang Dynasty's bureaucracy had been dominated by the great aristocratic clans. Families so old, they traced their ancestors back to the Han, or earlier. They filled government offices with cousins, nephews, and in-laws, passing titles like heirlooms. Wu Zhao had no patience for this. Aristocrats were, after all, her most dangerous critics. Why let them monopolize government when she could craft her own loyal machine? Her solution was as elegant as it was ruthless. She expanded the civil service examination system. Mainstream fact: Wu Zhao dramatically broadened the use of imperial exams, recruiting officials based on written merit tests instead of aristocratic pedigree. This move weakened the old noble clans and gave talented men from humbler backgrounds a chance to rise. Imagine yourself in Chang'an, a young scholar from a modest family. You've studied the Confucian classics by candlelight, your brushstrokes neat, but your robe patched from years of poverty. Before Wu Zhao, you might have had no path upward. Now, thanks to her reforms, you can sit for the imperial examinations. If your essay shines, if your poetry moves, if your mastery of ritual and history impresses, then, just maybe, you'll be tapped for service in the capital. To you, Wu Zhao is no usurper, no wicked empress. She is your patron saint, the door opener of dreams. Quirky tidbit: Wu Zhao introduced a special kind of examination, the Zhijin Shi, or Presented Scholar exam, which put more emphasis on literary talent and the ability to compose striking prose and poetry. This wasn't just academic snobbery. Literature was propaganda. Wu Zhao needed officials who could write edicts and poems that painted her reign as heaven's mandate. So yes, in a way, she weaponized poetry. The bureaucracy itself began to change shape under her hand. She created new government departments and filled them with loyal men, sometimes with women too. For example, she established a secretariat for scholars to oversee official documents and a new bureau to monitor public opinion. This layering of institutions created a parallel structure. The old Tang offices still existed, but Wu Zhao's additions shifted real power toward her chosen circle. And then there was the informal bureaucracy of fear. Loyal officials were rewarded, but those who criticized her risked exile, demotion, or worse. Wu Zhao empowered censors to root out dissent and rewarded whistleblowers who reported corrupt or disloyal colleagues. The bureaucracy became a chessboard, and she its grandmaster, moving pawns, bishops, and rooks with precise intent. Historians debate: was Wu Zhao's bureaucracy truly revolutionary, or simply a shrewd power play? Some scholars argue that she permanently shifted Chinese government away from aristocratic domination, laying the groundwork for a more meritocratic system that flourished under later dynasties. Others insist her meritocracy was an illusion. While exams expanded, appointments still favored those who flattered her or embraced her Buddhist-inspired propaganda. But to the common scholar in Chang'an or Luoyang, the reforms felt real enough. The city was alive with the murmur of students in tea houses, reciting lines of the Analects and Book of Odes. Bookshops sold cheap reprints of the classics. Ink-stained fingers smudged their margins, and the examination halls loomed as gateways to fortune. And of course, there was gossip. Everyone knew that Wu Zhao sometimes handpicked exam candidates or adjusted results to favor her supporters. Yet the promise was intoxicating, that a farmer's son might wear a purple robe of office, that intellect and loyalty could outshine ancestry. Another quirky note: Wu Zhao even introduced talent scouts into her bureaucracy. These were officials tasked with recommending promising individuals outside the exam system: poets, administrators, strategists, who might serve the throne. In effect, she built a recruitment agency centuries before LinkedIn. The catch? A talent scout's career depended on the success of his recommendation, so patronage and loyalty remained tightly bound to her. In this way, Wu Zhao's new bureaucracy was more than paperwork. It was a weapon, a shield, and a web. A weapon against the old noble families who despised her. A shield that protected her rule by giving ambitious men a stake in her survival. And a web that ensured she could pull the strings of power from the shadows, binding officials to her by gratitude, fear, or both. The court glittered with scholars who owed their robes to her grace. They filled the palace with polished memorials and ornate verse, each line crafted to prove that heaven itself had chosen Wu Zhao. And outside the palace, the aristocrats gritted their teeth, watching their ancestral privileges chipped away one brushstroke at a time. By the end of her restructuring, Wu Zhao had not only survived the throne, but reshaped it. The dragon throne was no longer the property of ancient families. It was hers to grant. And in doing so, she planted seeds that would outlast even her dynasty, ensuring that for centuries to come, China's rulers would look not to clan pedigrees, but to examination halls to find their servants. Ink and scrolls, her truest weapons. You settle deeper into your imaginary silk pillows, the fan humming softly in the background. The palace halls of Chang'an stretch endlessly in your mind's eye. But something feels different now. The throne is firmly in Wu Zhao's hands. Yet political power alone isn't enough. Armies can be bribed, ministers can be cajoled or dismissed, but the hearts of millions of subjects scattered across rivers, mountains, and rice paddies, those are harder to hold. Tonight, you wander through incense smoke and temple bells, following the slow, deliberate rise of something stranger. The cult of Empress Wu. It starts, as so many things in Tang China do, with a mixture of genuine belief and sly calculation. Buddhism has already sunk deep roots in the empire, with its monasteries dotting every province. Wu Zhao realizes quickly, if you can tie your name to the Buddha himself, well, that's better than 100 armies. So she doesn't just sponsor temples. She practically brands herself as the female incarnation of Maitreya, the future Buddha destined to renew the world. Mainstream historians agree that she poured enormous sums into temple building and sutra copying, ensuring her pious image was broadcast far and wide. And here comes the quirky part. One text, called the Great Cloud Sutra, conveniently prophesied a female monarch bringing order to the world. And wouldn't you know it, that sutra popped up in circulation right when Wu needed it most. Imagine political propaganda disguised as a holy text, complete with the subtle claim that, yep, she's been predicted by the cosmos all along. It's like discovering an old Marvel comic that, oddly enough, foretells your presidency. Historians still argue whether Wu herself commissioned altered versions of these texts, or if ambitious monks bent the scriptures in her favor. Either way, the message was clear. Oppose her, and you're not just rebelling against an empress, you're thumbing your nose at destiny. The court, of course, played along in varying degrees. Ministers sat through sermons in grand halls, while giant golden Buddhas were unveiled, and murals painted Wu with halos that shimmered like sunlight on water. You walk past one of these halls, feeling the mingled smell of sandalwood and damp stone, while monks chant in rhythmic cadences that could lull even the most skeptical farmer into reverence. Outside, villagers gossip. Maybe she really is the Holy Mother. After all, crops are good this year. Faith and politics blur together until no one's quite sure where belief ends and strategy begins. But there's also resistance. Taoists, remember them, with their love of immortality pills and elixirs, sneer at this Buddhist-centered cult. Old Confucian scholars mutter that it's improper for a woman to seize cosmic legitimacy. And still, Wu presses forward. She sponsors elaborate ceremonies, parades, and even public readings of sacred texts that just so happen to glorify her reign. If you squint, it looks like a medieval PR campaign. Incense instead of Instagram, sutras instead of tweets. You imagine the night sky over Chang'an, lit not by neon, but by flickering lanterns, each one carrying the whispered rumor. Our ruler is chosen by heaven. That whisper, repeated enough, becomes belief, and belief, repeated enough, becomes the sort of legitimacy that armies can't buy. Wu Zhao knows this better than anyone. Still, historians wrestle with one question. Was she a true believer herself, or just an opportunist who wrapped herself in saffron robes for convenience? Some argue her patronage of Buddhism was sincere. After all, she spent hours in temple rituals and left behind inscriptions in her own hand. Others suggest it was all smoke and mirrors, the perfect blend of piety and politics. You'll never know for sure. But tonight, lying in your half-sleep, you sense the power of that ambiguity. Sometimes, pretending to be sacred makes you sacred. And so, the cult of Empress Wu grows. Half faith, half theater, all strategy. A ruler crowned by sutra, haloed by incense, and whispered into legend by monks eager for patronage. It's the soft power that binds an empire, and the soft whisper that seeps into your dreams. You're lying there, barely awake, when the silk curtain of history shifts again. For years now, Wu Zhao has ruled from behind the Tang throne, first as consort, then as regent, then as the mother of the dynasty. But there comes a point when even the most patient spider steps boldly into the center of her web. Tonight, you watch her do something outrageous, dazzling, and just a little terrifying. She ends the Tang Dynasty, at least for a while, and proclaims her own. It's 690 CE, and the city of Luoyang hums with rumors. Messengers ride out carrying edicts sealed in vermilion. Officials murmur behind their sleeves. Farmers, squatting in the dust, hear strange tidings. The Tang is gone, There is a new dynasty now. Wu Zhao has declared the Zhou dynasty, reviving the name of an ancient golden age and planting herself at its head as sacred and divine emperor. Yes, emperor, not empress. She makes it plain in her proclamations. She's no shadowy regent, no stand-in for her sons. She's the son of heaven, or perhaps the daughter, though she avoids that word. Mainstream historians record that she even introduced new characters into the written script, as if the very language of China should bend to mark her reign. It's one thing to change laws. It's another to change the alphabet. Quirky detail. Here's one. She had a giant bronze mirror, cast and set in the palace courtyard, the so-called Mirror of Heaven, where officials were supposed to reflect, literally, on their virtue before coming to court. Imagine being a stiff Confucian scholar, forced to check your conscience in a colossal mirror, like some cosmic dressing room, before bowing to a woman most of you once dismissed. The proclamations spread far and wide, gilded with cosmic legitimacy. Temples thunder with ritual drums. Monks chant that she is the Maitreya, the future Buddha. Officials bow and draft new seals stamped with the name of Zhou. But in the tea shops and market stalls, ordinary people scratch their heads. Zhou? But I thought we were Tang. Some shrug. Dynasties come and go. Rice still needs planting. Others whisper in awe. Maybe this means a new age is dawning. Heaven itself has chosen her. Of course, there's pushback. Confucian purists blanch. Rebellions flicker at the edges of the empire, claiming loyalty to Tang princes. Some generals mutter that Wu has gone too far. But for the moment, the machine of power holds. Armies are paid, granaries are full, and the new dynasty gleams like fresh lacquer. Scholars debate even today. Was this proclamation a genuine rebirth, or just a rebranding exercise? Some argue she truly wanted to wipe the slate clean, to break free from the Tang family, and anchor her rule in something unshakably her own. Others suggest it was cosmetic, a dynastic name change to buy time and legitimacy until her heirs were strong enough to restore Tang. Either way, the Zhou existed, however briefly, shimmering like a mirage on the scroll of Chinese history. Close your eyes and picture the ceremony. Vast banners ripple in the palace courtyard. Courtiers kneel as the new imperial seal is unveiled. Wu Zhao, clad in robes of blazing yellow, ascends the dragon throne, her voice clear and steady. The Tang has ended. The Zhou begins. In that instant, the centuries-old pattern of male succession shatters. A woman doesn't just whisper behind the throne anymore. She is the throne, as the echoes of her proclamation roll across the land. You drift with them, through temples, fields, and dusty roads, wondering at the audacity of a single person daring to redraw the world. The Zhou dynasty has been proclaimed, banners unfurled, seals recarved, and decrees thundered into every province. Yet a dynasty is not built on proclamations alone. It lives, breeds, and thrives within the palace walls. And so tonight, instead of rebellions and proclamations, you wander into the silken chambers, the echoing courtyards, and the meticulously choreographed world of imperial court life under Empress Wu. Imagine stepping across the polished stone floors of the Luoyang Palace. It smells faintly of sandalwood and ink, with incense spiraling in thin, white ribbons from brass censers. Beyond the great red gates, Eunuchs shuffle about with quick, quiet steps. Shadows carrying scrolls, trays of lacquered food, or messages sealed with the Empress's vermilion brush. The day begins before sunrise. Court officials line up outside the Hall of Brightness, rubbing the sleep from their eyes, their hands clutching stiff scrolls, heavy with ritual phrases. The Emperor, or in this case, the Empress, will listen to reports of floods, taxes, bandits, harvests, and anything else that needs her judgment. They bow until their foreheads nearly press the floor. But when they rise, they see not a Tang prince or fragile boy king, but Wu herself, poised and inscrutable, her eyes sharp enough to slice excuses in half. Court life is as much theater as politics. The clothes alone are a performance. Wide silk sleeves brushing across jade-inlaid floors, embroidered dragons writhing in golden thread, hats with stiff wings extending like calligraphers' brushes, designed to keep ministers from whispering too close together. Even the servants are part of the choreography, each movement drilled into them until pouring a cup of tea looks like a dance. And then there are the banquets. Ah, the banquets. Long lacquered tables set with delicacies from every corner of the empire. Steamed dumplings from the north, oranges shipped from the south, freshwater fish plucked from the Yangtze, golden goblets filled with rice wine pass from hand to hand, while musicians pluck the pipa and strike the drums in complex rhythms. Dancers swirl, sleeves like waterfalls of silk, moving in patterns that seem to draw celestial constellations right there on the floor. But beneath the music and silk, the palace is a hive of whispers. Eunuchs trade secrets like coins. Scholars sharpen their memorials with veiled barbs at rivals. Concubines and consorts smile sweetly at each other while quietly calculating who might rise and who might fall. A single misplaced glance at the Empress can spell exile or worse. Here's a quirky detail that comes down to us. Empress Wu is said to have installed a mechanical listening device, a wooden screen shaped like a phoenix, hollow inside, so she could eavesdrop on ministers when they thought they were speaking privately. Whether it was real or simply court rumor, the effect was the same. Nobody ever felt safe whispering. For the common official, court life meant an exhausting dance of survival. If you praised the Empress too extravagantly, you might be accused of flattery. If you hesitated, you might be branded disloyal. Ministers often spent nights scribbling drafts of a single memorial, wondering, should I say, brilliant as the sun, or brilliant as 10,000 suns? Which adjective might accidentally get me executed? And yet, many thrived. Poets found patronage. Buddhist monks gained influence. Administrators who showed loyalty were rewarded with posts that gave them power over provinces larger than kingdoms. The Empress was stern, yes, but also shrewd. She knew how to make her court glitter with talent, how to draw the most capable men and women into her orbit. Still, life inside the court was gilded and claustrophobic. The palace walls kept out invaders, but they also trapped everyone inside. Ministers who longed for the simplicity of country life found themselves aging beneath painted beams, their fates bound to the whims of an empress who never missed a detail. So, When you walk those shadowed corridors in your dream tonight, you feel both awe and unease. The palace is a jewel box, glittering, orderly, magnificent, but inside the jewel box, even the brightest gems can crack under the weight of expectation. Court life under Empress Wu is not just about ruling. It is about watching, listening, and surviving. Every bow, every smile, every carefully chosen phrase is another thread in the vast tapestry of her reign. And you, wandering through it, can almost hear the murmur of silk sleeves and the quiet thunder of a dynasty that now revolves around one extraordinary woman. The silks and banquets of court life may glitter, but behind them lurks something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Tonight, we slip into the shadows where secret police and informers stalk the halls of the Zhou dynasty. You wake in a dream, not in the glowing halls of Luoyang, but in a narrow corridor smelling of ink, oil lamps, and damp stone. No music, no dancers, just the sound of slippered feet echoing softly and the faint rustle of scrolls. These are the places most courtiers never see, the offices of Wu Zetian's feared secret apparatus. Historians give it many names. Some call it the Investigations Bureau. Others liken it to a shadow government within the government. Its eunuchs and officials reported directly to the Empress herself. Their task? To watch, to listen, to note every whisper of disloyalty, every hint of conspiracy. At the heart of it was a man named Lai Junchen, perhaps the most notorious of all Wu's agents. He was said to keep files on hundreds of officials, their sins, real or imagined, carefully inked onto bamboo slips. Some described him as a master of psychological games. He could coax a confession from a terrified scholar without raising his voice, simply by describing in detail the punishments that awaited if the truth didn't come quickly enough. Rumor claimed he had invented bizarre tortures, iron collars, locked boxes with spikes, interrogation chambers where light never reached. Whether these stories were true or the fevered imagination of terrified ministers, they spread like wildfire, and that was the point. Fear itself was Lai Junchen's sharpest weapon. Imagine being a minister at court. You've just left the morning audience with the Empress, scroll in hand. You spoke carefully, praising her brilliance, but not too much, critiquing policies, but never her person. You think you did well, until you notice a eunuch following you at a distance, or a scribe who lingers a little too long outside your chamber. That night, you cannot sleep. Was your choice of phrase brilliant as the moon instead of brilliant as the sun a subtle insult? Did you bow half a second too late? By morning, your hands shake as you write your memorial. The system of informers made paranoia seep into every layer of court. Ministers denounced rivals in flowery, indirect language. Concubines whispered accusations about each other's loyalties. Even family members could not be trusted. Sons might denounce fathers to gain favor. It was said that under Wu's rule, a man might die from words not yet spoken aloud, simply because someone claimed he might have been about to commit treason. And Wu listened. She was no naive monarch, blinded by gossip. She knew the value of fear, of keeping her court too fractured and nervous to unite against her. Informers ensured no cabal of scholars or generals could ever gather enough strength to challenge her throne. But there is a chilling paradox here. By empowering secret police, Wu protected her reign, yet she also filled her empire with ghosts of suspicion. The streets of Luoyang bustled with merchants and monks, poets and laborers. But inside the palace walls, laughter always had an edge of nervousness, and even poetry felt like coded survival. A quirky little detail for you. Some accounts say Wu kept a special wooden drum of justice placed outside the palace gates. Any subject, high or low, could beat it to demand her attention if they felt wronged. But here's the twist. Many were too afraid to strike it, fearing that their complaint might be twisted into treason. It stood as both symbol of fairness and silent warning. In Wu's China, truth and survival did not always walk hand in hand. And so tonight, as you wander those silent lamplit halls, you sense the unease that coated the empire like fine dust. Every whisper carried weight. Every glance was a risk. In a court where even shadows could report to the throne, safety was an illusion. The Empress sat at the center of it all, watchful, calculating, her informers feeding her threads of rumor that she spun into power. For those who served her loyally, life could be rich with honors. For those who wavered, the secret police were never far behind. Not every corner of Wu Zetian's reign was shadow and suspicion. For all the whispers of eunuchs and the tapping of informers' pens, there was also light, a golden age that blossomed under her careful, sometimes ruthless hand. Tonight, we drift into that side of the story, the age of prosperity that many Tang poets and later historians quietly admitted was real. You step into Luoyang again, but this time, the air feels different. The paranoia of the last dream softens into bustle and warmth. It's market day. The wide avenues are alive with silk merchants calling out the sheen of their bolts, Persian traders showing glittering glassware, and caravans that smell faintly of cinnamon, pepper, and frankincense. Wu's reign, far from stifling commerce, made the capital a magnet for wealth. Taxes were organized more efficiently. Land reforms meant farmers, at least for a while, could till their own soil without crippling levies. Wu promoted merit-based examinations for officials, so even a peasant's son with enough brains and brush skill might hope to rise. That meant fresher talent, not just jaded aristocrats, had a hand in governing the empire. The bureaucracy hummed like a great loom, weaving stability into daily life. And stability meant prosperity, fields filled with millet and rice, trade routes stretched like arteries across the empire, and cities thrived. Luoyang, with its broad boulevards and towering pagodas, dazzled visitors. One Arab envoy wrote that the Tang court surpassed the palaces of Byzantium, filled with treasures that shimmered in the lamplight. But prosperity wasn't just in coins and caravans. It was cultural too. Wu loved scholars and poets, and she wasn't shy about sponsoring them. Some were tasked with rewriting histories to shine kindly upon her reign, but others simply flourished in an atmosphere that, paradoxically, valued intellect as much as loyalty. The imperial exams, expanded under Wu, gave poetry a central place. So to rise in government, you had to master not just law, but the art of words. Imagine being tested on your ability to write an impromptu verse about the moon. A quirky but brilliant way to ensure cultured officials. Temples also bloomed. Wu poured wealth into the construction of great Buddhist monuments, most famously the Longmen Grottos, where colossal Buddhas still gaze serenely across the Yi River. The most striking of them, the Vairocana Buddha, nearly 17 meters tall, is said to bear Wu's own likeness. A divine mother, carved in stone, radiating calm over her people. Pilgrims came in droves, merchants passed through in greater numbers, and Luoyang swelled with life. And ordinary folk? Many likely remembered these years less for secret police than for full markets and safe roads. Grain prices stabilized, roads were patrolled. If you were a farmer with enough to eat, or a craftsman with customers at your stall, the Empress's politics may have felt very far away. Of course, not all shared in the glow. Aristocratic clans, whose grip on power Wu broke, fumed quietly in their estates. Some Confucian scholars muttered that prosperity bought with illegitimate rule could never last. Yet even many of them admitted the empire was running astonishingly well. A later Tang historian, no fan of Wu personally, confessed that, in her time, the empire was orderly and the people prospered. That grudging respect tells its own story. Imagine you wander the marketplace one last time, before sleep draws you out. A storyteller by the tea house recounts tales of distant lands where Tang ships now sail. Children chase one another with little paper kites. A Buddhist monk passes, chanting softly, his bowl filled with rice from grateful townsfolk. Above it all, banners flutter with the phoenix crest of the Zhou Dynasty, Wu's dynasty, proclaiming a reign not just of fear, but of flourishing. It is a strange balance. A throne built on suspicion, yet surrounded by undeniable prosperity. For a time, Wu Zetian gave China both. The golden glow of prosperity could not last forever. Even in the most splendid dynasties, shadows gather in the corners. And for Wu Zetian, those shadows often came from the people closest to her own family, her own children. Tonight, we step into that uneasy chamber of her reign. The succession struggles that haunted the end of her dynasty. You stand again in Luoyang, the dazzling capital. But instead of the hum of markets, you hear the hushed, bitter arguments of the court. The question of succession looms like a storm cloud. Wu Zetian was aging. She had ruled longer than anyone thought possible. First as consort, then as regent, finally as emperor herself. But emperors, even the most formidable, are mortal. And so, who would inherit the dragon throne? Her sons were the obvious heirs. But obvious does not mean simple. The eldest surviving, Li Hong, had once been crown prince, praised for his intelligence and kindness. Yet years earlier, he had died suddenly, poisoned, many whispered, though who delivered the fatal cup was never proven. Some pointed the finger at Wu herself, who perhaps feared his growing independence. Others suggested palace rivals struck him down. Whatever the truth, his loss cast a long, uneasy shadow. Then came Li Xian, another son. He too briefly held the title of crown prince, only to fall into disgrace. Court gossips said he had plotted rebellion. Some believed he was framed by Wu's loyal ministers, who fed her suspicions to keep themselves in favor. He was demoted, exiled, and eventually executed. One after another, the heirs of Gaozong and Wu seemed to vanish, like candles snuffed out in the night, that left Li Dan and Li Jie, later known as Emperor Zhongzong. These two would become the most prominent players in the struggle. Li Dan, thoughtful and cautious, was often considered too mild, almost monkish, for the throne. Wu had placed him as heir at times, only to shift again. Li Jie, in contrast, had a more fiery spirit. He briefly ascended the throne after his father's death, but Wu deposed him, finding him too easily swayed by his ambitious wife, Empress Wei. It was a dangerous flaw in Wu's eyes. After all, she had once been that ambitious wife herself. Perhaps she recognized too much of her own fire reflected in her son's consort. So Wu kept the throne. Year after year, she delayed the inevitable question, ruling directly, while her sons circled like restless hawks. Each appointment of a crown prince felt temporary, conditional, subject to Wu's shifting trust. Court factions seized on the uncertainty. Ministers allied themselves with one son, then the other, whispering promises and plotting late into the night. And beneath it all, one fear throbbed. When Wu finally left this world, would her Zhou dynasty survive? Or would the Tang be restored? Some argued Wu hoped to pass the throne to a grandson, ensuring her own line would endure. Others said she never truly intended for the Zhou to continue beyond her. It was a scaffolding for her power, not a dynasty to outlast her. Historians still debate her true intentions. Meanwhile, the palace seethed. Succession struggles are not clean debates. They are messy, often bloody affairs. Poison was a language as common as poetry. Eunuchs and court ladies became spies, carrying secrets from one chamber to another. The Empress's sons lived like actors on a stage, where one wrong word might mean death. Picture Wu Zetian herself in these years. Older now, yet still commanding, her presence undimmed. She weighed her children like chess pieces, which could preserve stability, which might undo everything she had built. Perhaps she hesitated because she knew too well what power could do, how ambition could corrode the loyalty, even in family, and perhaps she feared, too, that in choosing a successor, she signed her dynasty's death warrant. For though she ruled as the Empress of Zhou, the Tang princes waited. Aristocratic families longed for restoration. The future was not only uncertain, it was dangerous. As you leave the palace hall in this dream, you hear the muffled sound of weeping behind a silk curtain. A prince, stripped of titles, begs the heavens for justice. Somewhere else, a minister sharpens his brush, drafting yet another memorial, urging the Empress to decide. The throne is solid gold, but beneath it lies shifting ground. Succession, the one thing Wu Zetian could never fully master, was the crack in her empire's foundation. The story of Wu Zetian has often been told as a rise, a climb from the harem to the highest seat in the empire. But every rise must meet its twilight. Tonight, In the hush of Luoyang's twilight streets, we enter the final years of her reign. You wander once more through the palace halls of the eastern capital. The corridors are quieter than they once were. Gone is the thunder of court audiences, when Wu Zetian's will seemed as immovable as stone. Now, in her 70s, the woman who had bent an empire to her hand began to feel the weight of time. Her health faltered. She suffered from illness, her once sharp energy dimming. Ministers noticed she attended fewer audiences. Instead, she remained behind curtains, her face glimpsed only rarely, her voice carried by eunuchs. Even so, her presence lingered like incense, powerful, difficult to forget. But power does not exist in a vacuum. Where Wu's grip weakened, others slipped in. Enter the Zhang brothers, Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong. Young, handsome, and charismatic, they became Wu's favorites in her later years. To her, they were comfort and companionship in an aging court that otherwise swarmed with rivalries. To her critics, they were dangerous flatterers, parasites who held undue sway. The Zhang brothers styled themselves as her confidants, even lovers, attending her chambers daily. They fed her music, poetry, and admiration, easing the loneliness of her twilight. But they also drew resentment. Ministers who had once bowed loyally now whispered of corruption. Generals hardened at the frontiers, seethed at the idea of soft youths holding the empire's ear. Meanwhile, Wu's sons lingered in the background, waiting, ever waiting. Li Dan, the cautious one. Li Che, the once deposed. Each had factions ready to move when the time came. But Wu clung to her throne, unwilling to release her grasp. Even as illness stole her strength, it is easy to imagine her at this time, wrapped in thick robes, reclining on a couch, the air heavy with the scent of medicine and incense. In one hand, a brush trembles slightly as she signs decrees. In the other, a jade cup of tea, held steady by a servant. And beside her, the Zhang brothers murmur softly, their voices a blend of affection and calculation. Outside, the empire remained prosperous. Canals flowed with grain. Caravans carried silk and spices. But inside the palace, instability brewed. The contradiction was stark. An empire flourishing, yet a court decaying. The ministers of the court eventually decided they had seen enough. In the year 705, a coalition formed. Loyal Tang princes, generals, and senior officials. Their goal was not merely to remove the Zhang brothers, but to bring Wu's reign itself to an end. The coup came swiftly. Soldiers stormed into the palace, dragging the Zhang brothers to execution. Their heads fell, their whispers silenced forever. Wu Zetian, too ill to resist, was forced to abdicate. She handed the throne back to her son, Li Jie, restored as Emperor Zhongzong of Tang. And with that, the Zhou dynasty crumbled, erased in name, though never forgotten in history. For the last few months of her life, Wu lived quietly, stripped of her title as Emperor. She was referred to once more as Empress Wu of Tang, as though her reign had been a dream, an interruption in the dynasty's long march. But even in death, she would not conform entirely. When she died later that year, her tomb was prepared beside Gaozong's, and on her stele, something remarkable. No inscription. Where other emperors had carved records of glory, Wu's remained blank. Perhaps it was her choice, a final defiance, leaving history itself to judge her. Or perhaps it was the Tang court's attempt to erase her. Either way, the silence speaks volumes. The last years of Wu Zetian's reign were a paradox, marked by decline, yet sealed by defiance. She had risen higher than any woman in Chinese history, and even her twilight carried a kind of grandeur. And as you drift from the palace in this dream, you cannot help but feel that her presence lingers still. The Empress who dared to be emperor had fallen, but her legacy, complicated, contested, unforgettable, remained. The night is quiet. Lanterns flicker against the Luoyang walls, and you know this story is drawing to its close. You've walked beside Wu Zetian, from her days as a silk-clad girl in the harem to the ruler of all under heaven. Now, in a dimming candlelight of history, we arrive at the last chapter, her fall and her legacy. Wu Zetian's fall was sudden, but not surprising. Her health had waned, and with it, the confidence of her court. When ministers and generals struck in 705, they weren't tearing down an empire so much as opening the door for her sons to return. The Tang Dynasty was restored in name, and Wu's Zhao dynasty became, in the eyes of traditional historians, a brief and troublesome interlude. But history is never that simple. Even as Wu withdrew to quiet chambers, the mark she had left on China could not be erased. Her policies lived on, the exams she expanded, the promotion of capable officials from outside noble clans, the bureaucratic systems she refined. These did not vanish when she was forced aside. They became the backbone of later Tang governance. Yet her image was complicated from the start. Tang historians, loyal to the dynasty she had interrupted, often painted her as ruthless, manipulative, even monstrous. They described her rise as a tale of betrayal, of discarded rivals, of poisoned chalices. And yes, Wu had been ruthless, sometimes terrifyingly so. The executions, the secret police, the silenced opposition, all testify to that. But is that so different from the emperors who came before her? Or was it only more shocking because she was a woman? Later centuries wrestled with that question. For Confucian scholars, Wu Zetian was a dangerous example, a woman who overstepped the bounds of her gender. For poets, she was a fascination, bold, brilliant, impossible to ignore. For the people who benefited from her reforms, she was a force of opportunity. Even her death monument captures the tension. Her stele, famously blank, leaves no official inscription of her deeds. Some say this was her decision, a challenge to future generations. Write what you will about me. Judge me, if you dare. Others argue it was the Tang's attempt to erase her, to deny her the permanence of an emperor's official history. Yet, ironically, that blank stone speaks louder than any carved boast. It makes you lean closer, think harder, and remember her more vividly than if it were filled with praises. In later eras, storytellers, novelists, and dramatists reimagined her. To some, she became the archetype of the femme fatale, seducing her way to power. To others, she was the very model of a capable ruler who happened to be born female. In modern times, her image shifted again, celebrated in films, television dramas, even pop culture, as a woman who defied her age and claimed her destiny. her legacy is layered. She was the only woman in Chinese history to take the imperial title for herself. Not as a regent, not as a puppet master behind the throne, but as Huangdi, emperor. That singular fact ensures she can never be forgotten. But perhaps her greatest legacy is not her gender alone. It's that she proved the empire itself could bend, that the mandate of heaven was not bound to tradition, nor to clan, nor even to the usual rules of inheritance. For half a lifetime, the Middle Kingdom called a woman its son of heaven, and the world didn't collapse. As dawn creeps into your imagined Luoyang, you take a last look at the silent stele by her tomb. Blank? Yes. Silent? Yes. But in that silence is the echo of all she did. Lover and schemer, reformer and tyrant, visionary and usurper. The fall of Wu Zetian was the end of a reign. Her legacy is the conversation she left behind. A conversation still alive today. And as you close your eyes, you realize history remembers her not in spite of her being a woman, but because she dared to be emperor. And now, as the story of Wu Zetian fades into quiet memory, it's time to let go of the noise of courts, rebellions, and whispered intrigues. You've walked the long halls of the palace, heard the rustle of silk, felt the chill of power and the warmth of ambition. But all that can rest now. Take a slow breath in and let it drift out again. The lamps of the Tang court flicker lower. The bustling markets of Chang'an and Luoyang fall silent. Even the secret police have set down their records for the night. The empire, vast as it was, slips into sleep. And so can you. You might picture Wu Zetian's tomb, quiet under the stars. The blank stele standing watch. No carved words, no etched proclamations, just stillness. It reminds you that even the loudest lives end in silence, and that silence can be peaceful. Another breath in and out. The past becomes soft, like mist rolling over distant mountains. The clamor of voices, historians, poets, critics, admirers, all grows faint. What remains is a sense of time flowing on, carrying all stories gently forward. You don't need to remember every name, every law, every act of power. You can simply let the impressions rest. A girl in silk, a woman who rose, an emperor who dared. Her story belongs to history now, and yours belongs to the quiet of this night. So allow your thoughts to loosen, like scrolls rolling shut. Let the stillness of the centuries settle over you, soft and calm. The empire sleeps, the world sleeps, and you drift with it, safe, warm, and at peace. Close your eyes, breathe, rest. Tomorrow can wait. Sweet dreams.